This episode was recorded on December 8th at finished about 7:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So anything could change in the next little while. Well, hello everyone. This is Christian Bassar again with another episode of the podcast. This one is going to be quite short, and it's not going to be really researched so much, but just looking at two big events that happened last week. So the first one is the uh, kind of coup attempt by President Yoon Seok Yeol of South Korea, which happened last Tuesday. Suddenly, over the night, he declared martial law, and troops were sent to the parliament buildings. Supposedly, arrest orders were given for political party members, but it was all over, and he revoked the martial law order just overnight. So it was quite the event there. And then the second one is the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, where I believe about a week and a half ago or so, that HTS and other Syrian opposition groups decided to push for the Assad regime capital in Damascus. So now President Bashar al-Assad is now in Russia with where the Russians have given him asylum. So, again, this is not a deeply researched episode or anything like that, but just some of my thoughts. For the first one, for the coup attempt, or some might say consolidation of power through military means, whether that's a coup. I always used to think of a coup as sometimes where the military acts in opposition to the current president or the current leader in power and then takes over, or through assassination or through taking of buildings and stuff like that, and taking of power centers. But in this case, it was a president trying to use the military to consolidate power. So, a lot of this analysis you won't only get from here, you'll get from other places. So my impression of that is that Yoon's popularity, as many of you know, if you follow South Korea at all, is that his popularity is below 20%. He's had numerous scandals involving his wife. He kind of had a small mandate in the first place. I believe, if I remember right, he was voted in 2022. Um, just around the time that the war between the full scale invasion of Ukraine happened, and so it was around that time, and I believe he was voted in with only 51% or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't quite remember, but it was very close. So his People's Power Party, or PPP, narrowly defeated the Democratic Party, which was the party of the previous president, Moon Jae-in. So Yoon Seok Yeol has been unpopular for many reasons. One thing that I've noticed, it seems to be that one thing that makes him unpopular, not just his lack of political experience. For one, he was a prosecutor before, not really so much political experience, but also in the corruption scandals with his wife accepting larger, more valuable gifts than she was allowed legally. And he had to publicly apologize for that. I think it just this last May, I think. It was very recent, just within the last few months. And so another thing that seems to make him a little bit unpopular too is his kind of more hawkish position on North Korea. The previous president, Moon Jae-in, had met Kim Jong-un, was working on making the relationship between North and South Korea work better, and so on. But Yoon Seok Yeol, he's kind of rejected that. And he's kind of tried to go, I wouldn't say that maximum pressure or anything like that, but definitely more in line with Western strategy, less appeasement. And I think especially after the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, around the time Yoon got elected, it was a popular thing. At that point, any kind of negotiation with Russia was kind of seen as appeasement. And so then it's natural to try and apply that attitude towards other countries like North Korea, other rivals of the West. So I think that is not quite popular in South Korea. I lived in South Korea for 4 years, and we think we can, it's again through lenses, right? If we think of something through a Western lens, we'll always think of like all Koreans want North Korea to be destroyed. All South Koreans want to be confrontational against North Korea, right? But that's not necessarily the case, right? So it's like, I think the way that they think of it is like for the last 70 years, they've lived in this state of kind of like undeclared war but it works. It's peaceful. And there are some flare ups and so on and stuff like that. And there's always vigilance. South Korea still does conscription into the army and so on. So there is that attitude of caution, but let's not push this too far. So I think my impression is, again, without dealing deep research into it, my impression is that kind of maximal pressure approach or hawkish approach towards North Korea is not very popular, especially since it seemed to be working under Moon Jae-in. Because Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong Un, as I said, had a number of meetings before, and then Trump was even trying to negotiate with Kim Jong Un at the time as well. So, and those didn't really go anywhere either. But still, at least that's seen as a possible way forward rather than just being hawkish and doing all of these things. Another thing that is also very unpopular, seems to be very unpopular in South Korea as well, is the possibility of sending weapons to Ukraine. So again, kind of in the same vein of being hawkish against North Korea and then hawkish towards Russia as well. Not that Yoon Seok Yeol is very hawkish towards Russia necessarily, but kind of like, again, this kind of pro-democracy kind of shtick, right? We need to stand strong against autocrats and so on, which ironically he just decided to declare martial law himself. So there's the great hypocrisy there. There's the great irony. Um, so one of the things that was kind of debated over the last month or so was when we have these revelations or allegations of 10,000 North Korean troops fighting Ukraine in Kursk, in the part that Ukraine is currently occupying. That pocket is getting smaller. Um, so in that so there's kind of this idea came up of possibly South Korea sending Ukraine weapons, which is illegal under South Korean law to send weapons to a country that is at war. South Korea is a major arms producer and seller, and so they've sold artillery vehicles to Poland, I believe, just last year, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years ago, around that time. And so that has been what's happening there. But I think that idea of sending weapons to Ukraine is very unpopular, right, in South Korea. So, but which is kind of interesting because I believe just the Friday before Yoon Seok Yeol declared martial law, Ukraine's defense minister went to South Korea and decided to talk with the South Koreans and possibly talking about aid, or I'm not sure what kind of details they talked about, but South Korea did actually say no to sending weapons to Ukraine. So they kept up that policy. Um, but then, so I think that whole thing with kind of going back to Yoon himself personally, um, this low credibility, this low popularity, and the fact that the Democratic Party, not American but Korean Democratic Party, had control of the parliament and was wanting to impeach some of his officials and wouldn't push his budget through, or wanted to reduce his government budget, and all of this, he probably just decided, well, I'm just going to push martial law and do that. But then, you know, I don't know if that's quite a way to filibuster a bill through, but but I think this is much larger than just a government bill. But I think, and also I believe he also said that he wanted to make sure that his wife was not investigated. There's no need for this, even though he publicly apologized on his wife's behalf a few months ago. So we need to remember that South Korea's history is full of military dictatorships, which the U.S. was happy to support because they were allies and so on. But so I am thinking that's probably what he decided to do here, just to see that, okay, well, this worked in the past, so I'll try it. But it didn't work. The parliament was able to meet, even though they weren't supposed to. They were still able to get into the parliament building, the National Assembly, and do a vote, unanimously vote down the martial law measure. And then the troops that were sent to the parliament were retreated. So, and then a few hours later, Yoon called off martial law. So it kind of became this quick little thing, and that didn't work out. And then just recently, he survived the impeachment attempt because his People's Power Party walked out on that vote. So it's yeah, it's quite an interesting drama there. But I'm not the type of person to make predictions. I think that predictions as an historian are not always wise to do. But if I were to predict, I would be surprised if he's still president by the end of the year or by middle of next year. Let's just give it a wide margin. Um, so it's a very strange situation there. It took everybody by surprise. Um, but the fact that the leader of his party also said that he should step down or he should not be president anymore, that's really telling. And it seems to be that this was just something that he just decided to do, and so then he just gave the order and that was it. And that was yeah. So I don't know how much more there is to say, but something, I shouldn't say similar, because this is the first time martial law was declared in Korea in a few decades, but just the something, okay, not similar, but when the not the previous president, but the president before Moon Jae-in, President Park, she was also impeached and eventually went to jail, and then voting was done, and then Moon Jae-in was voted in very shortly after. So this could be a similar case. I don't know. A lot of people who are more attuned to South Korean politics could give more, but as someone who has lived in Korea for a few years and kind of got good impressions of things while over there and having a general idea of the history, that's kind of what I think. One thing that I should also note is that I lived in a perhaps more liberal part of South Korea. I lived in Gwangju, um, which was an area that had the 1980 Gwangju uprising and also a massacre, which was the uprising was done in retaliation against a coup in 1979, so the army was eventually sent in, and a lot of people passed away, were killed in the uprising there. And then that kind of led to the eventual decline of South Korean dictatorships, and then it became a democracy in 1987 or 1988, I think, actually. All right, 87, 88. So those are some of my very initial thoughts on what has happened in South Korea. Then let's talk about Syria, because if you've listened to my podcast for any length of time, you've probably seen that I have talked quite a bit about Syria, but mostly not so much in the history of the war, the civil war that's been going on for about 13 years, but more Russia's involvement in it, right? They sent military forces in September of 2015 to save the Assad government from the various rebel groups that were threatening to take power, and Russia was able to help save the regime and also to keep an air base in Khmeimim and a naval base at Latakia. Those are things that happened, and then it kind of stayed relatively stable until just about a week and a half ago. So, without going into the details of what happened over the last week and a half, what I kind of want to talk about is like Russia's new role potentially. Obviously, this would be a loss. Russia has been involved in Ukraine for the last almost 3 years now, and with a full-scale invasion. They were involved in Ukraine before they got involved in Syria, but not to a full scale, not as a full-scale invasion. So the situation in Syria has changed things as well. The situation in Syria has certainly changed a lot. They think that right now Russia's biggest concern would not be the survival of the Assad government, because, well, Assad is now has asylum in Russia, and he doesn't control Syria anymore. The biggest concern for Russia now is if they are able to maintain control of the airbase at Khmeimim and the naval base at Latakia. Again, I'm not going deep into this episode with what assets they have and so on and things like that, and how many troops are there. I'm frankly not quite sure. But over the years, I do believe that their losses and their losses in Syria have not been that much. Certainly not compared to Ukraine, obviously. I mean, even the United States, if they're going to do a full-scale invasion of a country, they are obviously going to lose a lot more than they would in a kind of a counterterrorism operation or a rebellion suppression operation that Russia was involved with in Syria. So apparently, and this is again as of December 8th, 7:16 p.m. 7:16 p.m. Mountain Time. So things can change a lot. So we don't know what will happen tomorrow. We don't know what will happen for the next few months. But so far, the HTS, which is the former Al Qaeda affiliated group that has taken over Damascus, and they seem to be the powers that be at the moment. So what they will do with coalition governments, or will they form a coalition government with the Kurds? Will they form an alliance with the pro with other groups? We don't know. We don't know exactly what will happen. So, but supposedly HTS has been in contact with the Russians and has said that we will not harm any Russian personnel or stations or military installations in Syria. So if that holds, then Russia gets to keep their base in the Eastern Mediterranean. I think the biggest question will be if, for some reason, Russia decides that they can't maintain that position anymore. If they find that it's not valuable anymore, those assets could be used in Ukraine. They could be used elsewhere. Who knows? And then the question is, like, where do they go after that? Do they go through the Straits of Gibraltar back to the Baltic Sea Fleet? Do they go back? Do the air assets go over Turkey, which is very possible because Turkey and Russia they're on very amicable terms with each other, and they've made recent deals with each other and so on. So so that's where the future of this lies. Does Russia want to maintain a military presence in Syria that their raison d'etre of the whole mission in the first place is finished, the survival of the Assad government? Or do they just want to keep the base? I mean, they already have the bases there, so why not stay? So if they can arrange that, I think they would stay. That's what I would think. Um, so we'll have to see because being in the Eastern Mediterranean gives a gives a valuable strategic option to a kind of strategic projection, which a lot of Russian histories have talked about Russian and Soviet um, so projection abroad, and one of the weaknesses that Russia has had is access to warm water ports, right? So, and Latakia is a perfect one. It's in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's near a U.S. ally, Israel. It's in the Middle East. But will Russia's role in the Middle East be diminished, or will it be more of a soft power thing? Already, it kind of has become more of a soft power thing because the Syrian civil war had been relatively stable for many years until just recently, really. And they have still maintained good connections with many Arab countries and even Israel before October 7th last year. So it's very, I don't want to make any predictions of any kind. I try to avoid predictions as much as possible. Um, so yeah, those are kind of my thoughts. The big question is what will happen with the bases? What will Russia decide to do, and what will the new former Al Qaeda groups or other rebel opposition groups, what will they do? Syria's prime minister has reportedly stayed behind and said that we will have to create a new situation. I guess Assad decided last minute, it seems, that the situation was hopeless. There's no point in fighting anymore. So he ran to Russia. So we will see. It's been a wild week. Many times history is a wild ride. But the most important thing is that what we need to remember is that we hope that all of these situations in South Korea, especially Ukraine, but also in Syria and other conflicts around the world, Sudan and everywhere, they end as soon as possible. Anyway, those are my impressions over things of the last week or so. What I want to do in the show notes is kind of provide some links to give some more helpful information about these two things. Just a few links that you can use because a lot of my analysis will probably not be too much different from what many other people have already said, but I wanted to include my thoughts since I've lived in Korea for a few years and my And my master's thesis was about Russian intervention in Syria, but admittedly, ever since then, I haven't really kept up with Syria so much. Anyway, take care, everyone. God bless, and have a good one.